Welcome to the Mythicists Milwaukee Show podcast. Before we get started, we'd like to extend special thanks to all the sponsors of the Myth Information Conference 3 coming up on October 21st at historic Turner Hall in Milwaukee. Freedom from Religion Foundation, the Sophia Wolf Quadracci Memorial Fund for Stem Cell Research, author of the new book Mythos Christos, Edwin Herbert, Atheist Alliance of America, Atheist Republic, Godless Engineer, Kenosha Racine Atheists and Free Thinkers, and the Atheist Community of Milwaukee. Your $300 sponsorship includes a table at the conference, 1 ticket to the event, and 1 ticket to the VIP party, as well as a mention on all of our various social media platforms, including this fine podcast. Buy your tickets and sponsorships at mythicistmilwaukee.com. All of us here at Mythicist Milwaukee would like to thank all of our patrons for supporting this show. And now here's your hosts, Rob Moore and Brian Edward. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. It's another episode of our favorite podcast, the podcast that puts God last. I'm your host, Rob Moore, the Deacon of Doubt. And with me, as always, the co-host with the mo-host. He's Brian Edwards, the Friar of Free Thought. What's going on, Brian?
Friar of Free Thought is hanging out and enjoying the fine day and our next awesome guest.
The winds of fall are upon us ever so slightly. The slant of the sun has angled down just slightly, and this time of year, and around August, you can feel the night coming a little earlier.
Your poetry moves me, Rob.
I know that. Thank you. I count on it, man, every week. But yes, it's beautiful weather. The cumulus clouds pile up, and the breeze is off the lake, and everything's wonderful here in the land of many spires, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where we do this fine podcast every week down here at the Grand Avenue Mall above the TJ Maxx in the old Plankinton building. A meat packer he was. Have you packed any meat, Brian?
Not packed any meat, but we did finish 7th in the trivia contest with the team name
Atheist Afterlife. Unfortunately, shortened from, go ahead, tell her the original that you made up. Go ahead.
Shortened from, I just saved a bunch of money on my soul insurance by switching to atheism, which doesn't fit.
Smooth, man. It doesn't fit in the computer when we signed up for the league, so we had to call it Atheist Afterlife, a nice oxymoron of our own making. And there we go. But we like to forget about the 7th place finish and remind everybody that we crushed the competition to take first place again Thursday with a big 80 points and only 3 missed questions, I think. So we sponsor a lot of local events. The podcast, of course, goes around the world, so it's not that pertinent. But
there's no shortage of hubris here.
There is no shortage of that. But we do, of course, sponsor a lot of local events for the secular community here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We don't want to let that go by or let that go underappreciated, because we have a team of volunteers and activists here who really get a lot done on the national and the global, in fact, when you take into account places like Greece and Kenya that we've dipped our fingers into, but the local scene as well, with a lot of interesting and fun stuff to do, including a Tuesday night secular discussion group. You can find all of that, of course, at mythicistmilwaukee.com. We have a meetup page as well, the Milwaukee Atheist Skeptics and Humanists, and you can find our local community here. So please avail yourself of that if you happen to be within a few miles or so of the fine Cream City, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We have Amanda Metskas with us today. She is a shaker and a mover in the movement.
Yeah, definitely.
She's a former SecCo president, and now she runs CampQuest.
That's right.
I'm really psyched to talk to Amanda Metskas. Are you there, Amanda? Thanks for being patient.
I am. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's a day of podcasts here, our second one in a row, recording at least. I'm personally excited to talk to you because education of children is one of my passions and a primary reason that I got into this to begin with. But let me read the little bio here. Amanda Metskas is the executive director of CampQuest and the provider of background music today.
That was my Roomba.
For the show. Is that Roomba?
Which I forgot. Yeah, my Roomba turned on. I forgot it was scheduled to go on right now.
It's perfectly suiting that you have a Roomba. You're a science person. She's been involved with CampQuest since 2003 and served on the board of directors from 2004 to 2007. She became executive director when CampQuest Inc. hired her as its first staff person in 2008. As executive director, Amanda oversees the growth and development of CampQuest. Amanda holds an MA in political science from the Ohio State University and a BA in International Relations and Psychology from Brown University. Now, I would much more likely say the Brown University, I'm afraid. Maybe that's a little obvious, but we always laugh when we see the Ohio University. So you've been in the movement for a while, and tell us, get us going. Tell us about the awesome work that Camp Quest does.
Sure. But before I get going with that, I got to say it's great to be on a Wisconsin podcast. It's not in my bio, but I grew up in Stevens Point, Wisconsin,
All right.
the home of the world's largest trivia contest. So also glad to see that I'm on a podcast with trivia players.
Wow.
I'm glad it's leaked its way down here.
That's speaking of trivia, that's trivial. What was it again? The world's largest
trivia contest. It's 54 consecutive hours long. It's a whole weekend in April, run by the college radio station.
Good Lord.
And you should totally check it out.
We should. I've never even heard of that. That's trivia.
That's a lot of hours.
Yep.
And
you
also
have to sleep in shifts. So you need a whole team.
Stevens Point, also the home of a branch of the Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin.
Yes, it's true.
But anyway,
here in Columbus, we have T-shirts that say the, making a joke at our own expense about the Ohio State University.
I'm glad they don't take it too seriously because it's silly.
I know. The Buckeyes are really, a tough nut.
True.
Can't eat them. What do you do?
What do you do with a Buckeye, right? Throw it.
Yeah,
you
poisonous,
throw it.
in fact.
Yeah,
poisonous.
right. Yeah, they're ugly. Oh, well. Anyway, please, tell us about Camp Quest and all the awesome science work.
Getting back on track. Yeah, so, so at Camp Quest, we're really about fun, friends, and free thought. So it's week-long sleepaway summer camps. We had 18 sessions across the U.S. this summer. And I think there will be 19 next summer if I'm doing the math right. And they're for kids ages 8 to 17. And a big part of it is traditional summer camp fun, swimming, arts and crafts, sports, games, all the stuff you think of when you think of a traditional summer camp. But mixed in with that are interactive educational programs, science activities, philosophy activities, critical thinking challenges, world religions. We actually do out the different religions around the world. Famous free thinkers. We want kids to be aware that there have been people all around the world, people of all walks of life, who have been skeptical of traditional religious claims and have made some positive impact on the world around them. And so that stuff is all interwoven in with the traditional camp activities that we do. And then the third piece, that friends piece, one of the things that kids really value about Camp Quest is it's a place where they can make friends with other kids and know that they're not going to be ostracized or rejected, or it's not going to be problematic that their family doesn't go to church or that they're skeptical about a lot of traditional religious claims. It's a place where they can ask any question that comes to their mind and find that makes them friends instead of potentially costing them friends.
Now, do you find that your camp attracts mostly kids who are already secular thinkers, or do you get religious kids who are just loving science?
So we get a mixture. I would say it is largely kids from secular families. And I think that's in part because of the kind of the community that we grow out of, the secular community, and how people hear about us and that sort of thing. But we also do get campers who are religious. And I should say, I say that we largely get campers from secular families because we don't want to label the children with religious conclusions. They will come to their own conclusions about what they believe, regardless of whether their parents are believers or churchgoers or not. And, we don't want to just assume that these kids are atheists or are going to become atheists simply because their parents are. So we think it's important to not ascribe those labels to the campers. But, that being said, I would say the majority of our campers come from secular families. We do get some campers who come from like mixed religious families. So maybe one parent's religious and the other parent isn't, or maybe their grandparents are non-religious and their parents are religious. And what we've found is those kids have amazing experiences at camp, just, learning, questioning, growing, making friends. We have a really cool example of this in South Carolina where one of their volunteers is a former Seventh-day Adventist, and his older daughter is a believer and is still a practicing Seventh-day Adventist. And she came to camp as a teenager and said that it was the place that she felt the most accepted of anywhere. So here's a place where, other campers are asking her, pretty intense questions about, so why do you believe in God? And what is it that you believe? And things like that. And yet they're doing it in a way that doesn't make her feel excluded, but that makes her feel heard and accepted. And that, regardless of our differences in terms of what we believe about the world, we can have interesting, passionate, open conversations and care about each other at the end of the day.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, do kids that identify either secular or atheist, are they getting a certain experience in school, or is this camp just a place to get away from the summer camp that might have religious ideology along with all the fun?
So it depends kind of on where in the country you are. So we have camps everywhere from Southern California to rural Tennessee. And the experience that our campers are having in school and in their broader communities really differs depending on what part of the country they're growing up in, whether they're growing up in a larger city or a more rural area. So we've had some situations where we had some campers who went to public school in Tennessee, and they were getting marked down on their papers in school for writing CE and BCE as the academic dating conventions instead of writing AD and BC. That their parents had to kind of step in and be like, hey, like that's like the academic standard for this. You can't be just marking this wrong. And similar things happening to that family where their child was given a suspension for not saying the Pledge of Allegiance, which, it's a right that to opt out of saying the Pledge of Allegiance based on Supreme Court cases that go back, 50 years now. We definitely do have situations where kids are in, public school environments that are still not welcoming to people who don't share a mainstream Christian worldview. And then we have a lot of other kids who their being non-religious might not be, or being from a non-religious family may not be a big deal in their school, but it's different to have something be not a big deal than to have something be a place where you can actually explore this stuff. You can actually ask these questions and share your thoughts and your passions with people around you.
That makes sense. I mean, if you're at a very conservative religious facility in any way, right, certain questions are they don't want you asking them. So yeah, just have a place where any question is okay to field. That sounds good to me.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to day camp or in summer camp, overnight camp, to both, and as a youth, I remember it being very vaguely tied to religion, but tied to religion nonetheless. Some of them were sponsored by churches, and again, they weren't proselytizing churches. They weren't what any of us think of as an evangelical church today, but they were on land run and owned by churches, and you sang Kumbaya, and the songs and not all of them, but half of them had a Christian bent, so. I know what that's about. To have, summer camp is traditionally a very religious experience for most kids. I think it has been historically. Was Camp Quest the first to break that mold? Is it still one of the only ones that does that specifically?
Yeah, I think we were definitely the first. Founded in 1996, 20 campers ages 8 to 12. Believe it or not, at the Bulletsburg Baptist Church Camp in Kentucky. That was the facility they rented the first year. That worked out for a couple of years. And then the Baptist higher ups got wind of it and they weren't real happy about it. So even though the on the ground staff we were working with at that camp was, very welcoming and kind to us, the higher ups decided they didn't want us back.
Well, you were paying. Capitalism always
camp
trumps.
Moved after a few years.
Capitalism always trumps religion, I find.
But
it can.
But definitely the first. And I think in a large, I think maybe still the only Camp Inquiry ran for about 10 years, run by the Center for Inquiry. And so I would say for that 10 years, there was Camp Inquiry and there was Camp Quest, but they've recently decided to go on hiatus. They're not offering summer camp anymore. So I think it's us.
It's obviously a difficult thing to keep one up and running and profitable and doing so it can keep doing its mission. You are currently looking for help with that. You want to go ahead and pitch the site. It's campquest.org, I believe.
Yes, campquest.org. And there are two main ways people can help us out. One is donations. So we try really hard to keep the fees that parents pay to send kids to camp affordable. And we also offer camperships for families that have financial needs, so that to the extent we can make it possible, cost isn't a barrier keeping kids from coming to camp. But what that means is that there's stuff that goes into running camp, like running our registration system, running our online training for our staff, these kinds of things that aren't necessarily built into the fees that parents pay. And so we rely on a community of donors that support the work that we do and make it possible for these camp experiences to happen and these kids to go to camp. So at campquest.org, there's a donate link right up there on the web page, or campquest.org/donate. The other thing that we rely on is volunteers. We have a very, very small paid staff and more than 400 volunteers around the country who are running these 18 weeks of camp. Everything from camp director to cabin counselor to people leading programs and activities, people managing off-season training and registration, camp nurses. At some of our camps, we have kitchen staff too. These camps happen because of this dedicated community of adults who come together and make these experiences possible. And I think, what keeps these adults coming back year after year as volunteers is they find the camp experience so rejuvenating and fulfilling for them. The opportunity to sit in a Socrates Cafe discussion with kids from a whole range of ages and hear these kids come up with just amazing perspectives on the world. It restores your faith in humanity a little bit. And also, our volunteers really build a community amongst themselves. And some of the best friends that people develop in their lives are the friends that they make camp counseling together. So, and also we've found some people who've met at camp as camp counselors and are now married. It's a community that is really gives something to the campers, but it also, I think, really gives something to the adults who volunteer and make these camps happen.
It's Camp MatchQuest.
I don't know that I want to promise quite that much.
Anything can happen, right? So it started when, and how many are there nationwide?
Started in 1996, one camp with 20 campers, and now there were 18 weeks of camp nationwide this summer. The last session in Washington State, Camp Quest Northwest, just ended yesterday. So we're just finished with this summer session. I actually don't have the total camper numbers from this summer at my fingertips yet. I should have that by the end of next week. But last summer we had about 1,200 campers, or a little over 1,100 campers. So I'm expecting it'll be around 1,200 campers this summer.
And how many states? How many different camps?
18 weeks in 14 states.
14 different states.
Yeah. That's a 5,000% increase over your first 24.
Yes.
There's not one in Wisconsin, right? We're surrounded.
No, the closest one to Wisconsin, well, actually, depends on where in Wisconsin you are. So in Milwaukee, your options would be either Camp Quest Michigan, which meets on the western side of Michigan near Kalamazoo. I know you got to drive, under, down into Chicago and then back up to get around the lake. So that's kind of a pain.
Or you could take a Lake Express.
There's that ferry that still goes, right?
Yeah, you could take the ferry. Yeah. That would be fun. Take the ferry to camp. So Michigan, and then for those in a more western part of Wisconsin or central Wisconsin, Minnesota, their camp location is just outside of the Twin Cities. And so they run 2 weeks there back to back. And so you can sign up for either of their 2 weeks. So those are the closest locations for your listeners in Wisconsin.
I ask because...
What about the rest, though? So we got Washington State, Michigan, Minnesota. Where are the others?
Okay, let me go down the list here. So this is alphabetical order by camp name. Camp Quest Arizona, Camp Quest Chesapeake, which is in Virginia, Camp Quest Colorado, Kansas City, Michigan, Minnesota. We have a new camp starting next year in Mississippi called Camp Quest Natchez Trace. Northwest, which is in Washington State. Ohio, they run 2 weeks. Oklahoma, Smoky Mountains, which is in Tennessee. It's in Smoky Mountains National Park. South Carolina, Texas, and they ran 2 weeks in Texas this summer. And Camp Quest West out in California, and they ran 3 weeks in 2 locations. So they ran 2 weeks in Northern California near Sacramento and 1 week in Southern California outside of LA.
All right.
Now, how are these? Were these chosen at random, or by luck and coincidence, on where you could find land, or how do you pick? Oh.
So it's a couple of factors. The biggest factor is where we had a dedicated community of organizers who were ready to get something going, and then those folks went out and with our help, looked for available host camps to rent. So all of our camps rent from existing campgrounds. We don't own any land. So, we rent from the Boys and Girls Clubs or the 4-H or the YMCA. Sometimes things go well with the YMCA. Sometimes they don't. It kind of depends on the specific region that you're in. But, you go out and you look for, okay, what are available camp facilities that rent to groups in the summer? And that'll determine a lot about your location. So there just aren't, in a lot of states, there just aren't a lot of options, and a lot of options, the weeks that the kids are off school aren't weeks that they're available for rent. So finding a good facility is kind of a key determinant of where camp happens.
This is cool. Now, you mentioned specifically these camps, you do a review of major religions as well as talk about the free thinkers of history. Could you expand on that? How do you do your review of religions, and what free thinkers are you talking about?
Sure. So the World Religions program and the Famous Freethinkers program, both of them are little 5-minute mealtime presentations. So you might do World Religions at lunch and Famous Freethinkers at dinner or something like that. And what we do with World Religions is we try to just give a basic understanding of what a certain religious belief or practice might be. So, a lot of kids, for example, we might run one on what is prayer, and the goal of these is not to tear down anyone's beliefs or practices, but to just get an understanding of, okay, when your friend is saying that they pray, what is it that they're doing? They're sitting down and focusing their mind on, on God or their higher power, whatever object it is of their prayer. And then usually they're, exhibiting gratitude or asking for help, or, that is, just kind of very literally what people are meaning and doing when they say they're praying. We'll also do World Religions on what is Buddhism, and it'll be these are kind of the basic tenets of Buddhism. Karma is a basic tenet of Buddhism, and then what does that mean? And do Buddhists believe in God? Well, some of them do, some of them don't. And so the purpose of this is just to give kids a accessible to their age level, just kind of basic academic background on what different beliefs and practices are out there in the world. Because, we live in a pluralistic society. You're going to run into people who have all sorts of different beliefs than you do. And having a basic literacy and understanding of what those things are is really important if you're really going to be a free thinker. If you're really going to say, I come to my own conclusions and I came to the conclusion that I don't think this is true and I think this other thing is true, you have to know some things about what the other beliefs are that are out there.
Yeah, it's my personal dream to see that happen in our society when children are educated to exactly what you're talking about at the elementary school level, not just in summer camp for a week, but as a part of their integral part of their curriculum as an elementary school student, right from the get-go.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Actually, in high school, I took a class called The History of Great Ideas, and it was basically a comparative religion class. And it was extremely eye-opening. And I think for a lot of people, a lot of their questions about these big questions about, is there life after death? Is there a God? What is the purpose of our lives and things like that? if they're only exposed to one answer, and that's the answer that they got, from the religion they were raised in and the family they were raised in, it's a lot harder for people to question when they've only been exposed to one set of answers. But if you hear, okay, well, these people, in India, most people are Hindus, and Hindus have these beliefs, and Hinduism dates back, to several thousand years BCE and things like that. You start to say, well, wait a minute, I was born in this family, and in this family were Lutherans, but if I'd been born in India, maybe I would have been born a Hindu, and then I would believe these totally different things. And like, well, if one of these things is right and one of them isn't, like, I need to figure this out. I need to find out what's true about the world. And the first step of that often is just knowing that there are a bunch of different options out there.
Do you think it's an effort on the part of the system to discourage that, don't you, in this society of ours where the Christian right holds such sway that textbooks are being changed? Don't you think that that's kind of if nothing else, a subliminal, subconscious effort to squell that and to enforce the status quo?
Yeah, well, and I think it's part of it's the Christian right, and definitely, like, especially in Texas, the amount of control they have over the education standards and the size of the textbook market that they have as a state, since they pick textbooks on a statewide basis, means that the textbook companies, just for economic reasons, are kowtowing to what makes the religious right comfortable, and they're leaving out things that are controversial. I think that's the other reason why this stuff doesn't get taught in school, is that you've got a lot of teachers and administrators who maybe do really want to teach this. They really do want to expose kids to these different ideas, but they're afraid, because if they do, a parent's going to complain. Maybe they're going to get a bad evaluation for their work performance. Maybe they're going to have a big media kerfuffle that they've got to deal with in their school and in their town. And so it's hard to be courageous. And I think in education, to really do education right, you need to be courageous. You need to not shy away from teaching the controversial topics that are going to raise some eyebrows and raise some hackles. But it's hard to do that because you've got a lot on your plate as a teacher or as an administrator, and, the squeaky wheels get the grease. And so if you know that there's an organized group of parents that's really going to give you a huge hassle because your science program teaches evolution, you're going to just tend to soft pedal evolution. Even if you think evolution is what it is, the cornerstone of our modern understanding of biology, you might just say, I can't deal with that headache this semester. And that's a huge problem.
Yeah, and I also would think getting people to agree on what Christianity is, even when it comes down to the basic principles, or Islam, is going to be fraught with a whole lot of debate on, extremists on both sides trying to get certain language in there.
Sure. And I think that part of the way you solve that problem is I think it's very hard for adults when they're educating children to say, I don't know. But I think one of the things that we try to do at camp is actually model for kids that the adults don't have all the answers. And so if you're teaching about something controversial, if you're teaching about, comparative religion, or even if you're teaching, did you notice when you were in school that your history class pretty much always stopped at World War II?
Yeah, it kind of did.
I was never taught anything after World War II. Well, why is that? Because the Vietnam War and the Cold War and these things, they were too fresh in people's minds. There was too much sort of political controversy about, well, was this a huge mistake that we made? And, what about U.S. interventions in Latin America? And how do we justify those things? And
well, I'm actually so old that nothing had happened, so there was nothing to put in the textbooks when I came through elementary school.
But it's just like, ooh, that stuff's too recent and it's going to raise hackles. So we don't want to go there. And I think that as educators, we need to be able to say, you know what? I have to have some tolerance for discomfort in my lesson planning, in my classroom or at my camp or when I lead this activity. And that might mean that I have to say, I don't know. It might mean that I have to say, you know what? There's a bunch of different viewpoints on this, and present a set of possible views, and that people don't all agree. People don't all agree about what the main tenets of Christianity are. That's why there are many, many, many different Christian groups, denominations.
That's a great point. And saying I don't know. I mean, just that phrase is fair.
I have two little kids in the elementary school system, so it's close to home for me. And even when religion has, or even when Egyptian culture, say, or Greek mythology is touched upon in the school, the religious aspect is kind of brushed aside, and you don't get to understand that there are other philosophies that predate, in fact, your own, or the ones that you might be used to seeing around you. And I think it's just a mistake. It's child abuse in my book to let families indoctrinate children before they're old enough to question.
The thing that was so scary to me when I visited the Creation Museum in Kentucky, I went with 300 and some atheists and freethinkers because we arranged a mass trip there several years ago. And they gave us discounted tickets so I could justify it because I was like, well, I'm at least not paying full price. But the thing that was so scary to me was seeing all of these families with their young homeschooled children. And so you just know that these children are not being exposed to any other ideas. So, and then here's this big fancy edifice that's been created to lend this legitimacy to the things that they're learning at home. So it's like, it's not just mommy and daddy saying that man and the dinosaurs lived together at the same time. Here's this giant, expensive, quote unquote museum that's showing that same viewpoint. And then you go into the bookstore of the Creation Museum and it's filled with homeschooling resources. And so, these kids don't have a fighting chance to question because they're locked in just a set of self-reinforcing ideas, and nothing that questions or challenges those ideas is allowed to get through.
We see the results of it all the time in our secular groups here, when people come wandering in off the streets that had literally never even been exposed to the idea of evolution because of things like homeschooling and, sadly, vouchers, school vouchers that are available at the taxpayer's expense to send kids to Christian schools, which aren't just Christian schools, which nobody really raised much of an eyebrow at. If you wanted to send your kid to parochial school in the day, well, good. At least they taught evolution. But now we've got creationists who've, and I don't mind if you want to believe in God, but don't lie to kids about things that we know.
Right. And I think people often miss that there are real costs to miseducating our children. It's not just, let them teach them what they want. Let them believe what they want. What's the harm? You get that argument a lot from people who don't want to have conflict. And I'm going, well, what about American competitiveness? What about our place in the global economy? Like, where are the next inventors and engineers and, doctors who invent the next life-saving surgery or innovate by creating the next vaccine? Where are those kids going to come from if we are miseducating our children so thoroughly?
India.
It's a real threat to our society.
Yeah, there's no doubt that if you're going to be promoting STEM, science, technology, and engineering and medicine, you have to give the basics. You cannot. You just can't skirt them.
And the thing about the homeschooling to me always killed me is that they don't let you teach whatever the language of speaking in tongues is. You don't get to teach that instead of English, but you can teach creationism instead of real science, and no one blinks an eye. How do we create a society where we can question people's religious values more? It's such a taboo subject. Is there a way to bring that to the public forum and go ahead and call people out when politicians' beliefs are ridiculous? Do you think we can ask? Should it be okay to ask them about that?
I think so, and I think this is something I've been thinking about a lot, which is I think that we need to both fiercely question ideas and treat people with love. And I think that it's really easy to not be able to do both of those at once. So people think that that treating someone with respect means that you don't challenge them when they say, oh, I think crystals healed me from cancer. That it's respectful to say, oh, that's nice for you. Well, that's not respectful, right? Because real harm is being done if this person is not getting the treatment that they need. And you're also sort of dismissing them as somebody worth even engaging with. You're saying, oh, your idea is so stupid that I'm just not even going to waste any processor cycles on talking to you about it. But if we then decide, okay, I do need to engage, how do we engage? And I think that the really important thing is that we engage in a way that separates, hey, this person is misinformed about this thing, or, has some beliefs that I find ignorant, or beliefs that I find even deeply offensive, but they're a human being. And they came to these beliefs, because of a set of circumstances, how they were raised, what they've been exposed to. And we've all been there in the past. We've all been at places where we believed dumb things because we hadn't been exposed to the things that ultimately educated us and made us change our mind. So remembering to step back and treat all people as human beings, worthy of our compassion, and as people who can learn and grow and change is really, really important to me. I don't think we're going to help people think better by shaming them and yelling at them, which doesn't mean that there isn't a place for fierce debate. It doesn't mean that there isn't a place for satire, but we have to understand what our goals are when we use those tools. And that if our goals are to bring people around and help people step out of some of the maybe delusions that they have, making them defensive is a bad way to do that.
Probably.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So using tools like satire, using tools like fierce debate in settings where those tools achieve your goals, and using tools of love and compassion and sort of an engaged discussion that maybe isn't quite as aggressive, if that suits your goals. And, if your goal is to build a relationship with someone, I think we all have people in our lives that we love and care about who believe things that we find a little bit scary, right? And how do we keep those people in our lives and keep them close to our hearts? We have to do it by engaging with them with love and compassion, while also saying, I don't agree with you about this, and I'm worried about, where this belief in homeopathy might get you now that you have this chronic disease that you're trying to treat. I question you about these things because I love you, I think needs to be more of our go-to.
Right. To somehow avoid identity politics by saying this person's a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or a Hindu, that's not the defining characteristic. That's about, it's
right.
As relevant as maybe the size of the toenail, right? To try to get past that. That way you can discuss them. If it's your identity, you're probably not going to want to discuss it.
Yeah, we all, and I think remembering also that people have multiple different social identities that are sometimes cross-cutting with each other. So, maybe somebody's a different religion than I am, but maybe they share my political views. So maybe we're, at a fundraiser for a candidate that we both really like. Well, okay, there's a point of commonality, or maybe we're both really interested in youth development and education, or maybe we're both part of a women's rights organization. And so there are usually some aspects, some dimensions of our social identities that we can use to build common ground. And then what we need to do from there, once we've built that common ground, is not shy away from dealing with the hard questions about the areas where we disagree. You build the common ground so that you have a foundation of mutual trust and compassion. And then on that foundation of trust and compassion, then you can actually talk about the hard issues where you disagree. And I think so much of what you see going on in America today with discussions about race, we don't have the foundation with each other to even have productive conversations on these really emotional, really hard issues. And if we can build those foundations, that's not an excuse to paper over and hide away our differences. It's a place that we can start from to then actually get into how do we understand the really different experiences that people are having in America based on their race or their class or their gender or their religion or their sexual orientation.
That's a good point.
How did you first get into this whole thing? Where did you come from in your own religious background or secular background?
Sure. So I was raised Lutheran, and my story is a little bit complicated. I was adopted through a Lutheran adoption agency as a baby. My parents couldn't have kids biologically. And when I was about 5, my dad stopped going to church. He was never really a big believer, but the church got a new pastor and he was like, I'm not really into this. And he stopped going to church. So I started asking, well, why do I have to go to church when Dad doesn't have to go to church? This doesn't seem fair. I don't like going to church. But I kept going to church all the way through high school, but it was a big point of contention between me and my mom and between my mom and my dad and my family, because my parents felt like they had promised to raise me Lutheran. And so then as I'm going through the confirmation classes and things, and I'm like, I just don't believe this. Like, I'm doing all the memory work. I'm going to the classes. I'm doing the community service hours, but I just don't believe. And I don't want to go up in front of the congregation and tell everybody I believe in X, Y, and Z and do that ceremony when I don't. My mom and my pastor and I had to have a couple meetings, and we came to a really satisfactory way of handling it, which was my mom said, if you do all of the requirements, class work, memory work, community service, you don't have to be in the ceremony if you're not comfortable with it. And so then I had to tell my pastor, hey, I don't want to get confirmed. And he was incredibly respectful. He really took me seriously and engaged with me seriously about my views and my doubts. He assigned me reading. I read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and I wasn't convinced. But he said at the end of all that, he said, you've thought about this more than anyone else in the confirmation class. Because we were, us in confirmation class, we were like 13. And he's like, if you change your mind at some point in the future, I would be happy to do a ceremony for you and your family later. But he had to tell the church council that I wasn't getting confirmed, which he didn't tell me because that would have intimidated me at the time. And, he just kind of let them know, okay, this is what's going on. And I still had to keep going to church after that with my mom. And people were very welcoming and kind to me, and definitely treated me as part of the community, even though I think it was difficult for them to understand why I would reject confirmation. So, my experiences growing up with religion was that the Lutheran church that I grew up in was a very positive place in terms of it provided community. They did a lot of community service. It was a healthy place that was really doing something good in people's lives, but I still just couldn't buy the underlying theology. So, it's not that I was wounded by religion or treated terribly or had some oppressive experience. It was just that I would listen to the readings and the sermons and things and be like, I just don't think this is the case.
Yeah. It sounds like you got lucky with a pretty understanding pastor in a Lutheran church that leaned progressive, much like the ones
definitely
from my youth in New England, where it was common to have a certain healthy agnosticism in every congregation, and not the Missouri Synod weirdos who believe in a 6,000-year-old Earth. Is that right?
Right.
Was it one of those?
Right. No, I was raised in the ELCA, and Pastor Al, my pastor for most of the time I was growing up, was a really positive mentor and a great influence, even though at the end of the day, we disagree about religion. I think that he respects the work that I'm doing now. And I really value the mentoring he was able to offer to me as I was trying to figure out what I believed and grow up into an adult, which is a challenging prospect for anyone.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Did the kids at all, wonder why you dropped out of confirmation, or were they unaware that you didn't get confirmed?
They were aware. I think one or two of them kind of were well, I don't want to do this either, but they hadn't really prepared the way of having, it sort of seemed like a pile on at the end. And so they, I think, all wound up getting confirmed. But the other kids in my confirmation class, I felt really respected the decision that I made. I didn't feel a sense of sort of ostracism or anything from them about this either. And even, I was still part of the senior high school youth group for after people got confirmed. We'd go a little weekend trip once a year and things like that. And I still definitely had friends there.
It's a great story. It's hard to escape that community when you grow up, especially if it's a smaller town. That church, for me, it was just part of what you looked forward to, just like seeing your friends in school. It was another thing, and the theology was almost secondary anyway, in a way. So yeah, I identify with that completely.
That's something that Dale McGowan talks about, the author of Parenting Beyond Belief and lead author of Raising Free Thinkers, which I'm one of the co-authors on, is that the community that's provided through religion is something that we as secular people are going to need to create for ourselves. And I think that's something really powerful about what we do at camp is we create these multi-generational communities for kids and adults to grow and learn together and ask the big questions about the world. And, it's not like you can you can just quit going to church and then just not have that in your life at all. But I think for a lot of people, they're looking for meaning and purpose and community and are missing that when they leave the church. And so being able to create robust, healthy, secular communities, I think is really crucial.
The book is called Raising Free Thinkers, a Practical Guide for Parenting Beyond Belief. And you co-authored that with Dale McGowan, Marlene Metzmoor, and Jan DeVore. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
It's a great idea to come up with a book like that. I know the challenges that an atheistic parent faces. I tried it both ways. I tried indoctrinating my older daughter to atheism and then thought maybe that wasn't the way and let the younger ones find their own way. So it's not an easy road, and the parenting in any style is not easy. But good job there. Look for that book. And it is now time for Myth of the Day with our own Antonio, the Mythmeister. Take it away, my friend.
Thank you again, Amanda, for being on the show today. This week, Mythicist Milwaukee has garnished 12 new followers on Twitter, including Eric Emanuele with 32,000 followers, Andrew Magogo with 48,000 followers, and Greg Stevens with 44,000 followers. We have also added 152 likes this week. Today's Myth of the Day asks, are Easter eggs uniquely Christian? The answer is no. The egg is a symbol of rebirth and is featured in many ancient mythologies in various myths. The egg, like many other ancient symbols and practices, was taken and infused into later religions, such as Christianity. Here is a short list of earlier religions that use the egg symbology. The ancient Sumerians decorated ostrich eggs in gold and silver and were commonly placed in graves. The ancient Egyptians believed that the sun god Ra hatched from an egg. They also thought the sun itself was an egg. In the Zoroastrian religion, the supreme deity Ahura Mazda created an egg and placed all of the good gods in it. And in Hinduism, the shell of the egg represented the heavens, the egg white the air, and the yolk the earth. And that is our Myth of the Day.
Myth of the Day, brought to you by Kenosha Racine Atheists and Free Thinkers Activism in Southeast Wisconsin. The egg, the incredible edible egg.
Well done.
I like well done. I like them over easy, more than well done.
Sunny side up for me.
There, girl. Tell us about your time at SecCo, your Secular Coalition of America.
Secular Coalition for America, sure. So I was on the board there for a number of years and then wound up having to fill David Niosi's shoes as president when his term ended and he became the national legal director for the American Humanists Association. It was a real learning experience for me. I've been passionate about us having a voice in government for our community. Camp Quest has been a member organization of the Secular Coalition since I think 2010. I might be off by a year there, but I think 2010. And, for us, we have all of these families who are dealing with issues like, the good news clubs trying to invade their public schools and kids getting pressured to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And then, the issues we were talking about earlier about evolution being cut out of the science classroom, history textbooks being rewritten to, make kind of a mythical history of America as a Christian nation. And so, we felt like it was really important that for our constituents, our campers and their families, that we had somebody advocating on our behalf and pushing back against those things in Washington. So as president, I wound up presiding over kind of a rocky time, but I was glad that I could be there during a time of transition and sort of help the organization through that. And I was also really grateful to be able to spend a few months in the office and learn what the staff there does every day. Just the level of dedication and expertise and just willingness to learn a new thing to solve a problem that I saw amongst the staff team at Secular Coalition for America just floored me and made it really exciting to spend some time there. And I was very happy that they were able to hire Larry Decker in January as the new executive director, and he's fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to where the Secular Coalition for America goes next. I think that, they have an opportunity to reach out to a broader swath of the nones, all these people out there who are functionally secular, but aren't really necessarily strongly identified with an atheist identity, but who really don't want a public policy that's being strangled by the religious right.
The nuns are Catholic. You can't fool me.
But I'm very punny.
So yeah, I think that they've got. So I think they've got a really bright future of kind of hopefully bringing to a larger segment of the American population a sense of why secular government is really important, and that even if people aren't feeling like a strong identity need to be part of an atheist or secular community, they should be feeling a strong push to support secular public policy, because that's the best guarantee of freedom and sound policy making for all Americans.
It's really inspirational, but they need to expand. You talked about their expansion. They need to expand back to Wisconsin. What's going on here with SecCo? We're still in disarray. What's the gossip? What happened?
Oh, that I don't know. So I was on the board through end of February or into March, but I've actually been off the board at Secular Coalition since then. I've been just trying to really focus on Camp Quest. It can get very tiring and difficult when you've got two big passions, two organizations that you serve that you're really passionate about. And I realized that I just needed to focus my energies on Camp Quest because we were growing so fast and it just needed my whole attention. So I'm not sure specifically what's going on with the state Secular Coalition in Wisconsin. I know that there's been to help state coalitions that were struggling kind of get put back together. I think that, a lot of that, honestly, just like our camp leadership, depends on finding the right key volunteers and keeping those folks engaged. And sometimes when you've got a volunteer and they're fantastic, things are really great. And then, something happens, they move, they have a health crisis, they change jobs, they have a baby. And the thing that they have to drop off their list of big projects can be their volunteer work or their activism, at least temporarily sometimes. And so filling in, doing succession planning and filling in when a key leader steps back, I think is a huge challenge for just across the nonprofit sector, not even limited to the secular movement. It's something I see all around. So I'm not familiar with the specifics of the situation in Wisconsin, but maybe some listeners to this podcast would get excited about getting more involved and getting that state chapter more active. And if you contact, I'm trying to think of what the email address to use. If you contact Secular, just go to their website, secular.org, and you'll be able to get in touch with the right person over there about the state chapter program.
No doubt that we agree that, that the secular government and secular public policy is the key to freedom for both religious and non.
Yeah.
I think the Wisconsin chapter went down amidst a scandal. I was looking for some actual juice, a little bit of intrigue.
Oh, no. For the podcast. I totally missed that scandal.
Yeah, no, I teased.
I missed that scandal.
Rob picks up a tabloid every now and then.
There are enough scandals in this movement. I can't keep up with all of them.
Right? How about it, right? Not funny, but
scandals are a human thing.
They are a human thing.
Right. No, and I think that that's really true. It's easy to get disheartened. And some of this stuff really is just evidence that we're growing. There's more people in the movement. There's more activities going on. There's more organizations. And, with that growth comes more infighting and drama, and the stakes are higher. There's more things to fight about because like we're actually winning in some areas and getting some traction. Well, then people's egos come in and they want to be the one who gets the credit for X or Y, and then activist people, they're people with strong personalities and trying to get everybody to get along and pull together and be aligned and work in the same direction can be very, very challenging. But it's, it's often because of our successes often that we have these challenges.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Were you at the Reason Rally? It was amazing. We were so close to lucky enough to volunteer right up front.
Oh, I was at the Reason Rally.
And there were so many people that I didn't get to see and didn't get to meet. It still blows my mind. It was like, oh, I didn't run into him. I didn't run into her. And I saw so many people, but it was so big that you couldn't see everybody.
Yeah. I was very lucky. I got to go up on stage briefly. We auctioned off a camper ship. Not auction, sorry. We had a raffle drawing. So anybody who visited the Camp Quest family tent at the Reason Rally, we had kids activities going on, could put in their name, and then the winning name gets a free week of camp next summer in 2017. And so I got to go up on stage with 2 campers from Camp Quest, Texas, and draw the name out and announce it. So that was super fun.
Nice. It's impressive to stand on that stage there and look out over the mall, isn't it?
Yeah.
Intimidating. Were you nervous?
Yeah, right. Not too bad.
Do you do a lot of public speaking? Has that ever been part of your bit?
Yeah, I do a fair amount. I was actually speaking the next day at the secular the after conference for Reason Rally, and I've spoken at a fair number of conferences, but I think my comfort with public speaking largely comes from I did 3 years of policy debate in high school and 2 years of parliamentary debate in college, and then I coached debate when I was in college for high school students. So, I just got the kind of trial by fire to public speaking where it's just like, you just got to go up there and do it. And you get up there and do it enough times and it starts to be a little less nerve wracking.
You hear that? She has debate experience. Boys, we'll have to tap her for a future Buzzed Belief debate. Would you be interested in that? We're sponsoring a debate series here, culminating in the Bart Ehrman, Robert Price debate in October.
I could be into that. It's going to depend on the topic. And I got to say, I haven't done any sort of structured debate in a really long time, but
you can pick it. We'll softball you.
Consider me potentially interested.
Awesome. Yeah. You will. We'll let you pick the topic, and then we'll find a patsy. How about that?
I'd rather debate against someone strong. You gotta steel man. Don't give me the straw man to pick apart.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Where do you fall on that spectrum? Do you pay attention to Christ myth theory at all? Or do you weigh in on the subject?
Not very much. I don't weigh in on it very much. I've heard Richard Carrier's talk on it a few times. I will admit that I haven't read his book because it's very long. But I mean, my feeling is that I'm pretty persuaded by Richard's argument, but it's also something where I'm just really pragmatic. And I guess I feel like the answer to the question of whether there was really a historical Jesus or not, it doesn't change my mind one way or another about, whether there was a divine Jesus and whether Christianity is real. You don't need to disprove a historical Jesus in order to say, well, hey, this whole story about the afterlife and all of this isn't the case.
Yeah, it's a moot point to an atheist. We get that too.
Yeah, so it's what I don't mean to dismiss it. I think it's an interesting set of questions from an intellectual and doing real strong historical work. I think it's intellectually fascinating, but it's something that for me, I've been really focused on the practical kind of community building aspects of the movement, and so haven't really dug in too deeply in that area. So I find it kind of fascinating, kind of in a hobby capacity. But I also have learned that I try to not take positions on things sometimes publicly when it's not core to the work I'm trying to do, because I don't want to. I don't want people to think, oh, well, Amanda disagrees with me about mythicism, and therefore, she clearly, is a terrible leader for Camp Quest. I feel like there's some issues where I'm I'm just going to remain agnostic about this one because it's not necessary for me to stake out a public opinion in order to do the work that I'm doing.
Lest the jaws of identity politics swallow you up.
Probably
right.
Wise. Probably wise.
So,
Amanda, we're about out of time. You got any final thoughts for us? Anything you want to throw in there at the end before I let you go?
just want to remind people to go to campquest.org. We'll be putting up volunteer applications for summer 2017. Those usually go up in December and January. And you can also support us with a donation. These camps will change your life, whether you're an adult or a kid. So have the best week that you've ever had. Be the most exhausted and tired and, crushed at the end of the week, too. Don't let me sugarcoat it for you, but you won't regret it.
And let the public help you start a Wisconsin chapter for me and my kids. I wish I could do it. I got too many irons in the fire as it is, but we have a creationist camp called Timberley in the outskirts of Kenosha.
Oh, I've heard of them.
Have you? Yeah. And if there was an
alternative,
alternative, it would be much easier for us at the local level to fight them.
Yeah, I think the best next steps on that are to get folks from Wisconsin getting involved as volunteers and as camper parent families with Camp Quest Minnesota and Camp Quest Michigan, because then people can learn the ropes. What is it really like to run a summer camp like this?
Yeah.
Spend the week on the ground as a volunteer, get to know the core organizers in your neighboring states, because a big part of how we work is that there's a network of camp leaders where, somebody in South Carolina figures out some awesome way to solve a problem. And then the folks in Virginia and Tennessee and Oklahoma are like, sweet, now I don't have to figure out how to solve that problem myself. So that's kind of a big strength of ours, that network. So getting involved in the camps that are closest to you is sort of the best next steps to trying to bring a camp into your state.
Amanda Metskas, Executive Director of Camp Quest, thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you, guys. This was really fun.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. We'll take it easy.
Take
care, Amanda.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Awesome stuff, man. She's doing great work out there for the movement. Join us next week when Willie Barcena, the comedian, he's got a Netflix special, and I believe he's a Mexican. He's a Latin American. Mm-hmm. He'll be joining us, and of course, there's a dearth of strong Latin presence.
Good word.
In the movement. So it'll be interesting to talk to him and get his perspective, and he can tell us how many Roman Catholic Mexicans flee the palace when he does his show down in Los Angeles. It'll be good. So join us next week for Willie Barcena and another episode of the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye. The Mythicist Milwaukee Show is brought to you by Mythicist Milwaukee. Producer Sean Frasek. Associate producer Melanie Lawson. Engineer Jason Lawson. Mythmeister Antonio Blandone. Researcher Kristen Whitaker-Hood. Closing theme written and performed by Shelley Siegel. On behalf of co-host Brian Edward and the entire team, I'm Rob Moore reminding you to keep it safe and to keep it secular.